Welcome to another episode of the A Trek Within podcast. Today, I'm very excited. I have a very special guest, Megan Brasser. She's the wife of probably my oldest friend on the planet. And Megan and I met, just a little background, Megan and I met at their wedding. And then it was literally years later that she and I developed a great friendship. And that was when I learned about her experiences and her psychic ability and just the incredible things that have happened to her, which is why she is prominently featured in my new book, A Trek Within, Following Your Inner Compass. Welcome, Megan Brasser.
Hi, Rob. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. It is such a treat to have you on the show. I love it. So, a great place to start is I know that you've had psychic experiences, dreams, abilities, that you, in hindsight, or maybe even at the time, recognized from a very young age. Tell us about that.
When I was growing up, I had no frame of reference for psychic. I just had a lot of weird things I would know about people and at a very young age, and they were very adult-like things that a child doesn't typically talk about, such as domestic abuse, for example, that I had no experience with in my own household. But I would, kind of hint to my mom that something like that was going on, and so I didn't have words for what it was. I would just know things about other people, and good and bad. I had no boundaries of whether it was really, really good or really, really dark. I just kind of was open, like an open sponge, and absorbed it all, I guess is how I would say it was.
Interesting. So, what was your parents' reaction to that?
Um, my mom just always asked me so many questions, and that's how I knew maybe something was a little different about what I knew, because it definitely caught her attention.
I bet. Yeah. I mean, how old were you when you first, like, for example, the domestic abuse stuff? How old were you when you began having conversations about that?
I would say 3 or 4 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, she's scared of her husband and things like that. But I just thought it was kind of like everybody knew that energy and knew what it was.
Yeah. And clearly they didn't. Yeah. I mean, most 3-year-olds don't really, well, even have a vocabulary for that.
Yeah, and I don't know what my mom would probably remember it better. I just remember I would know things that were um I would lightheartedly talk about things that weren't exactly lighthearted and everybody didn't know, like maybe secretive things.
Wow. Did any of the people whose, energy you were picking up on, were any of them aware of you and your ability?
I think it's highly unlikely. This is the late 70s, and I feel like I really would only open up to my parents and maybe my brother, definitely my older brother, who's 3 years older. I would say no.
Yeah. What was your brother's reaction? I'm curious because obviously the average 6-year-old wouldn't have a frame of reference for that either.
My brother is, he's just always been kind of um, one of my biggest fans. He always just listened and was always so kind and sweet. I wouldn't say that he shared this ability, but he always trusted in mine. I would say that to this day.
Interesting. Did you pick up on things like with his friends?
Um, the older I feel like it kind of went dormant in my teen years. I just wouldn't take it seriously. I would know things, but I wouldn't, it wasn't with his friends. I wouldn't say so that I remember.
Yeah, that was a weird little icon that just showed up. I don't know what happened there. That
I
was
know.
strange. I didn't do it. It wasn't me. Yeah. That's your spirit going, don't talk about this. It's not
Yeah.
good.
No, I don't remember anything specifically of my older brother's friends.
Okay. I'm curious. I guess the question I have around that is where did his trust come from? Because obviously, if you're talking about things, that somebody who wasn't aware or wasn't in tune might think, oh, that's nonsense. She can't possibly know that. He had a reason, obviously, for trusting it. I'm curious where that came from.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like he'd known me since he was 3. So I just feel like he really knew me. And like I said, I was very lighthearted about it. It was just kind of matter of fact and in passing. It was never like anything. I would never sit down and say, this was a profound experience. I'm 3 or 4 or 5. So I would say, so and so did this, just like I would say, I need to go eat a snack. So I don't,
Interesting.
yeah, I just feel like it was more in passing.
Okay. Yeah. How did your dad react?
My dad dismissed a lot of it. I mean, oh gosh, here she goes. I was very into talking about my dreams at least by the time I was 4 or 5. And so my dad was more entertained, and then a little impatient too. If the dream went on too long, it was like, okay, I've heard enough. And
That's
so,
really funny.
yeah, he's a Midwestern farm boy. So simple, um, great values and great dad, but he definitely wasn't into, tell me about your dreams and what you're feeling today.
Yeah, that would be hard for a lot of dads, I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So do you remember any particular dreams that either came true or that had, some message in them?
Um, well, I think my mom would remember childhood dreams that came true. I really don't. I just know that she was very into them. When my brother went off to, when he grew up and went off to college, I started having a repeated dream that he died in a car accident, which very much concerned my mom. And to the point that I think we went and talked to a therapist about it, or she did. And they basically said, no, this isn't like a premonition. This is Megan's really at a loss. She feels like her brother has, in a sense, died, because I was very traumatic. I would have to wake up, I'd be crying. I would need to call him at college and make sure he was okay. It was scaring him. It was scaring my mom. It was scaring all of us. So once a therapist said Megan has experienced a death with her big brother, one of her favorite people, leaving the house and the home. And, I'm not seeing him. Living in Florida. He's in Iowa. And so as soon as that therapist said, no, she is experiencing a death of her own. I never had that dream once. That was explained to me, that I'm mourning him, and then the dream stopped, and I just accepted I was mourning him, and I called him more without scaring the crap out of him that he's going to die.
Well, and that makes sense. It was cool that your mom was open to like looking at what's another possible interpretation, or how can we,
Right.
and being supportive of it as opposed to just being afraid of it and not dealing with it, which I can
Exactly.
imagine a lot of people might have done. And that
Yeah.
makes total sense that,
Exactly.
if you guys are really close and he leaves, yeah, why not? Why wouldn't you experience that as a death? It just makes, yeah, interesting. So you said it went dormant for a while. Tell me about when it picked up again.
I would say, I had a roommate in college. He's still my best friend. I would say it in college, it definitely, we would have really deep conversations. I wouldn't say necessarily about intuition, but just we just would have really deep conversations about life and what's beyond here. And but really, when I met my husband Richard at age 21, I didn't take any of my intuition very seriously. At that point, I still talked about my dreams nonstop with anybody who would listen. And I had a new listener in Richard, but he would ask so many questions, which the typical person would not. And he was so into my dreams that's when I thought, well, this is new. And it was definitely more like my mom in my childhood asking me a lot of questions. And I would say that's when it kind of reignited. I still didn't take it. I wouldn't have, I would probably say I didn't take this seriously until my mid to late 30s, even though I met Richard at 21. He took it very much more to heart than I did, I would say.
Interesting. Now, that's also a bit unusual and very cool to have a listener like that. What do you know about, what triggered him in that moment? And triggered is probably the wrong word, but like inspired, whatever word you want to use.
I would just say Richard's more of a sophisticated soul. Like he is worldly, he's well traveled. His mother was very, um, open minded, very smart, but very much into the woo woo side of the world. Where I had been indoctrinated into the Catholic Church, Catholic schools my entire high school, elementary school, everything. So I think I've learned slowly to shut it down and not take it seriously.
Mhm.
Um, Whereas he wasn't raised like that, and his mom was very much, she loved to study all religions. Richard was the same way. They loved learning about everything. So he just kind of had an unlimited capacity to think big.
Mhm.
And
Well, oh, go ahead.
oh, that no, I'm finished.
Oh, okay. Because what's interesting about that to me is that it's like with dreams. I don't know if you ever kept a dream journal, but I did that for a while. And the more that you do stuff like that, the more that you remember, not only the detail, but like multiple dreams. I remember at one point I would remember 7 or 8 dreams a night simply because I was taking the time to write it down. And anything like that, whether it's dreams or paying attention to synchronicities, so for anybody watching who's wondering about how do you develop abilities in some of these areas, or even start to remember dreams, is by simply paying attention and making a note. And so the gift that Richard gave you in that moment, in being a listener, was encouraging you. And the more that you talked about it, I'm sure the more that you remembered. So it doesn't surprise me at all that things began to escalate at that point, because anything that you give attention, energy, and focus to in a good, healthy way is going to continue to develop.
Exactly, just like a muscle you use. And
Yeah.
I was just so used to just, la la la, and then this happened, and then that happened, and la la la, and then I dismiss it for the rest of the day. Where he would ask me very specific questions, which actually made the memory click on. If you're asked
Mhm.
questions, you're going to retain the dream longer because somebody talked with you about it. And then when those conversations would happen, then when the actual event would happen, I'd remember that I had the dream, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. Because I had
Yeah.
talked,
Well,
only because I had talked about it.
got it. Yeah. Well, and that's one of the reasons I was really excited to interview you for this too, because it's there's such a range of abilities and whatnot, and I think we all have psychic and intuitive abilities. It's a question of, have we developed them, have we paid attention, and it's a really good example too in my mind that you are somebody that I consider really highly developed, but you're not one of these people who you're not making a living doing it. It's not like our mutual friend Nadia, who was interviewed earlier on the podcast. It's not, it isn't like that. It's more like you're just a really good example of what I would say like an everyday person, who has the ability, but who's developed it to a level much further than the average person, which is to me very inspiring, because I don't consider myself anywhere near your level. I have intuition, and I get some interesting dreams occasionally, but nothing along the magnitude of what you do. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say, going back to my brother when we were little, to answer your question, maybe he did have a gift. He just never spoke about it, because I do think children, we all come in kind of like I am. I mean, I just really think children are so intuitive. I just feel like we come in with such a powerful intuition, and if somebody can, you know, guide us, and it was my mom who kept mine somewhat intact. Um, and so going back to my brother, I just feel like maybe he did have something, because he definitely understood me.
Interesting. Now, a lot of times it seems like it's familial. It's not necessarily your parents, but often your grandparents. What do you know about any ability that's been in your family?
Oh, I definitely know my mom has it. I remember when I was a child and she sat up in the middle of the night and had a dream or had something that woke her up. And she said to my dad, Diana just died. And then she laid back down and went to sleep. And then the next morning, she got a call that her young friend, maybe in her 30s, my mom was probably in her 30s at the time, her young friend had died of a heart attack in her sleep, totally unexpectedly. She wasn't sick or anything. They didn't find out until after her death that she had an enlarged heart or something, if I remember correctly.
Wow, that's so sad. But did your mom remember waking up the next morning?
Um, I can't remember if she remembered or my dad remembered, but yeah, they definitely knew she knew before she should know.
Yeah. Well, I remember. It doesn't surprise me that your dad would remember. The reason I was wondering if your mom remembered is because so many times, people have dreams in particular, and they don't necessarily recall it. Like, there's a great story about Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones, who, he kept a guitar by his bed, and he woke up and he had an idea for a guitar riff that turned out to be the basis of the song Satisfaction. And he got up in the middle of the night. He had the presence of mind to record it, but then he fell asleep, and the recording apparently has the riff, and then it has like 45 minutes of him snoring because he had fallen back to sleep. But he didn't remember it until the morning when he looked and he saw that the tape was finished. So he went back and listened to it. And then it was like a week later that they began recording Satisfaction, because that whole thing had come to him in a dream and he didn't remember it apparently. It was just that he was triggered by the tape. There was another cool story about Arlo Guthrie, who had written a song called Darkest Hour, which is a great Arlo Guthrie song. And he literally wrote the entire song at night. Like, he woke up with it, got up, wrote it down, went back to bed. And then in the morning, he saw it next to his, on the table next to his bed. And he's like, and he told a really kind of funny story about how at first he's like, I don't know if that's actually my song, but he's like, it doesn't seem to be anybody else's. So it's mine, but the entire song came to him, not just like a lick, like Keith Richards. So, but in both those cases, my understanding, and that may not be 100% true, but my understanding is they actually didn't remember it when they woke up with the inspiration, in the middle of the night. In much the same way that, like, if I wake up in the middle of the night with a dream, then I think, oh, wow, that's really wild. I know I'll remember that. I wake up in the next morning, I'm like, yeah, I don't remember that.
Right. Yeah, that happens to me all the time too.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. So, what, I know you've also had some pretty amazing experiences that go well beyond dreams. Talk to us about that.
Well, yeah, I've had this I call it the voice since I can't remember, since probably 3 or 4, but it was kind of like Siri before Siri. It's a very computer like, it's very matter of fact, but I've argued with it since I was a child because it'll just show up out of the blue and it'll just say, do not go. Almost just like right here, do not go, a computer voice. And I say, what do you mean, do not go? And as I'm arguing, a car will go through a red light where I was going to get T-boned if I hadn't argued with the voice. So I've had probably at least 2 situations just like that, if not 3, where I almost got hit by a car, but I was too busy arguing with, what do you mean don't go? The light turned green, I'm in a hurry. And I've had a couple that have saved my children's lives as well. Probably the I would say I started really paying attention to my intuition because it really grew in my 20s and through my 30s. And when I was pregnant with my 4th child, just something about her, I don't know what it was, but I was incredibly intuitive the entire pregnancy. And then after I had Georgia, I'll never forget, she was probably 6 months old. This is the experience. Richard had taken me seriously for years, but this is the experience. Richard thinks it's funny that this, out of all things, is the one that really got me to listen to myself. But one morning, I was just cleaning the house, working on the computer. She was playing. She was at that age where she could crawl a little bit, but I could basically set her in a room and she'd stay with all of her little toys. And that morning, she kept crawling to a spot right by our fireplace, which above the fireplace was a huge, beautiful wood piece of art that had been hanging there for probably a month. And I just kept hearing that computer voice say, "Move the baby, move the baby." And so I would move her. And then, she just kept crawling right back to that spot. It happened 6 times probably. And I kept hearing, "Move the baby, move the baby." So this went on for hours. And I finally was like, "Why do you keep saying move the baby?" And I just, something guided me to look up at the art above the fireplace. And I argued, "That will never fall. Richard hung that a month ago. Richard does everything right. Like, Richard doesn't, he's so handy. If he does something, it's going to be done like professional level." And, and I just argued that that will never fall. Why are you telling me to move the baby? And it was very much move the baby. So finally, Georgia was just determined to keep going back to that exact spot for whatever reason. So I rearranged the entire living room furniture so she could not go to that spot and I could get some stuff done. And Richard comes home from work that night and says, "What is going on in this living room?" Because it was not a new design. It was purely like block that spot. And I just said, "Oh my gosh, it's so silly." The voice, which is what I call it, the voice kept saying, "Move the baby," which is so silly. Like, I don't know what could be wrong with her sitting by, the fire, that there's no fire in the fire. I said, "I don't know what could be so wrong, but something about that painting. But you hung that right?" Well, he was in the garage getting a ladder before I knew it, because he takes me he's like, "No, no, no, if the voice tells you something," he takes the voice more seriously than I do, and he does not argue. And so he climbed up there, and he just turned white as a ghost and said, like, the whole thing had bent down like this, and it was just like hanging on by a thread, and it was about to fall any second. The
Wow.
whole, like, hanging, whatever he put, I'm bad with tools, but he put he basically, like, a whole, what do you call it? The thing was going like that with the nail.
The nail or the thing that it was hanging on.
Yeah.
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 Like coming out of the wall almost.
Right.
That's amazing. Well, by the way, I have to say, for the record, he's always been meticulous. I remember he and I would go and make models and stuff when we were little. And, my whole thing, like, I'd follow the directions and I'd put, the B-52s together or whatever we were building. And I remember him building like this one fighter jet. And it was one of those like F-14 kind of thing. And he very meticulously painted it. I mean, it was gorgeous. And when I tried to paint stuff, it looked like a 10-year-old painted it, like with stuff all over. And when he did it, to your point, it always looked professional. Yeah. And so it's, there had to have been some fault with like the drywall or the nail or whatever, because to your point, that would never have happened.
Yes, he would be able to explain to you exactly what the problem was. But yes, I think I would have, I know I trusted him more than, even if I had them professionally hung, I would have questioned it more than how Richard would hang it. Just because you're right, he is that meticulous and he will figure out exactly how it's supposed to be done right. So,
Yeah. I think I frustrated him a lot.
oh, I frustrate him daily. Can you imagine? I'm the opposite of meticulous.
I know, me too. It's like you put a couple things together, do a little paint. Yeah, it's done. It's fine.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, I
that's really
told him,
good.
"I'm
Yeah.
gonna call with Rob in 15 minutes. My phone isn't charged and we've had the power outage." He's running around like, "Oh my gosh, why didn't you tell me this?" "Well, I don't know. It just, time snuck up on me." He's just so organized and meticulous.
Totally. I think he had like 10 different paintbrushes for like different size, lines that he would want to draw. And I'm like, yeah, I had like one watercolor brush.
I
Whatever.
know. Yeah, he takes his
Yeah,
time, right?
that's funny. Cool. So tell me about some of the other things that have happened that have gotten your attention.
Oh gosh. Oh, what realm? I mean, we've talked about this through the years. I don't even know. Some other things that have gotten my attention. I pay attention a lot to what children say because they are the most fascinating little intuitive beings, and all four of mine have such um they have such gifts that
Yeah,
I
that's
find
no surprise.
intact. Yeah.
Well, Haley in particular, tell the Haley story because she's amazing, and the fact that she used to laugh a lot, when she was a baby.
Oh yeah. So Haley was originally a vanishing twin, or originally a twin, and I had vanishing twin syndrome, which is basically if you lose a twin before 16 weeks, it's called um, 16 weeks in utero. It's called vanishing twin. So when Haley was a baby, she used to laugh in her sleep all the time. And it was just the cutest thing. I've just never seen a baby giggle in her dreams. And then the older she got, it came out around age 4 or so that she was with her twin that always makes her laugh in her dreams. And she even had a name for her twin, Sarah, that she came and when she started talking to us about. And Richard and I were just stunned because she actually did have a twin. And so that was pretty fascinating.
How old was she when you talked to her about what had happened? Because obviously that would be, the fact that she was doing it before you had ever even shared that information with her is, to a skeptic, I would hope confirmation that, she didn't just this wasn't just an imaginary playmate.
Right. Well, I think pretty soon when she started talking about it, Richard and I would look at each other like, this is crazy. So I think we told her right away, you actually did have a twin. We don't know if it was a boy or girl. But going back to when I was pregnant with twins, before I even had an ultrasound, I said to the nurse, I've been having dreams that it's twin girls. So don't be surprised if my blood work comes back high. And the nurse giggled at me like, oh, okay, honey, here we go. Pregnant woman thinking she knows what's going on. And I said, no, I really have. It's twin girls in my dream. And she laughed, and to the point I laughed too, because I'm still not, I'm 27 at this point, I think. So I don't take myself very seriously, but I never stopped talking about my dreams. There was never a point in my life where I'd shut up about my dreams because they were just always so vivid and colorful. I just couldn't help myself to talk about them to anybody who would listen. And I thought, I'll tell the nurse I'd been dreaming about twin girls. She laughed, I laughed. And then 2 weeks later, I was there and there were two little, little tiny little beans on the screen.
Wow, that's amazing. That's so cool. I love while we're waiting for Megan's connection to come. Oh, she's back. I was just going to say that I love it when medical professionals actually pay attention to that and are smart enough to pay attention to that
Yeah.
because there's a lot of there are messages that come and there are things that happen.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's pretty wild. Now, one of the things that I thought was really cool because in the book, both Megan and Haley shared their stories, and they wrote their stories from their own point of view, which is amazing. And the thing that struck me about Haley's story was the fact that she'd said she's never had a dream that Sarah wasn't in,
Right.
um, which is amazing. Because the other vanishing twin story in the book, my friend Marjorie, she had used to have a lot of dreams about her vanishing twin, but now she doesn't anymore.
That's the
Um,
thing, Haley. They've stopped now. She's 19 now, so I asked her the other day, "Do you ever dream?" And she said, "Mom, not really since I've been a teenager."
Interesting. Yeah. I wonder if they'll come back because, the other possibility that occurs to me is, did the soul of Sarah and the soul of Marjorie's twin just at some point incarnate again and then, wouldn't have been around to play in their dreams?
Right. Yeah.
That would be interesting to know.
I know. I'd love
I'm
to.
going to add that actually because we're going to do another follow up. You'll appreciate this. We're going to do another follow up interview with Fred and Nadia, and I've got a whole bunch of questions for Fred, and that would be one that I would ask: is why did they stop coming? By the way, you're welcome to help me with that if you want to submit any questions that you
Oh,
want to ask Fred because we're going to do one. It'll be really fun. I want to ask him all kinds of questions about like history and things that we may have gotten wrong in terms of our interpretation of what happened and just things, little mysteries and things that I've always wondered about on just a random collection of topics, and that would be a cool one to pursue.
Yeah, I love questions like that. Not that we'll
Yeah.
necessarily get answers in this lifetime, but I'm all about trying.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, if he can share it, there's no doubt in my mind that if he can tell us, he will. But
Yeah,
there's certain things that are not, they're not able to share,
right.
for whatever reason. And and Nadia had an interesting take on it because she said sometimes they're just not allowed to share because we're not ready to know it, and sometimes they actually don't know it either, um,
Okay.
which is kind of interesting.
Oh yeah, I just thought of one of my favorite dreams while we're kind of on the
Oh, cool.
So, in my life, for whatever reason, I don't know, mysterious reason, people seem to come into my life at a time of a lot of loss, a lot of death and loss. Even though I am not exactly, I haven't lost a lot of people in my life, so really close to me, fortunately. But I feel like I've had a lot of people who go through great losses. Richard even lost his mom tragically when he was 17. She died in a car accident. And when I was in college, my friend that I mentioned earlier, we're still best friends. She lost her brother Andy in a really tragic car accident. Um, and I was living with her at the time that happened. And so um, it's just so crazy. But even the night it happened, we were sitting on the sofa, and she, before we knew he had died, she was already in a very nostalgic mood about her brother. She said, I wish you could have known my brother Andy when he was little. And I said, why? And she said, because he's so cute. And I was like, well, he's so cute now, Jocelyn, because, I think we were 19, so he would have been 17. I was like, well, he's still really cute. And we just had this really fun conversation about Andy, but she was very nostalgic when I look back on that night, and very, no, I wish you would have known him. He was just the cutest kid you could have ever seen in your life. And he's just the sweetest personality and was always so good to me. And I was kind of mean to him sometimes. I wish I wasn't. She was just very, in a really interesting space that didn't make sense. But we sat and talked about Andy for a long time, and when she went to bed, I closed her door, and which we never did. We always had our doors open. And I said, I just feel like there's some sort of fire tonight, is what I said. So if you get up, feel your door. And which was so just out of the blue, but typical of me. And we went to bed, and an hour later or two, I can't even remember, but her parents came, and, I remember her horrific scream, and I knew something was really wrong. And sure enough, that there was a fire involved with the car accident. And of course, this was like her only sibling, and the absolute most devastating thing. And months, living with somebody who is deeply mourning, it's a very, very thick energy. The story does get a little bit lighter, but it's very thick energy. Um, it's what I've learned. And anybody that's gone to a funeral knows that energy. It's so palpable, and it's just such a distinct energy. And so that energy was in around us a lot, definitely around Jocelyn, for those that really, just really hard time. She was so strong. I don't know how she did it, but Andy would come to me in dreams, and he would tell me he wants to talk to Jocelyn, but it's too thick to get through. So can I tell her this? Because he could get to me super easily. And so I'd wake up in the morning and go tell her what Andy wanted her to know. But one night was just the most spectacular night, and maybe one of the last Andy dreams I got. And I think in hindsight, he maybe was doing a thank you to me for like all my messages to his sister. But he took me on the most amazing experience, that the only thing I can equate it to is when I watch near death experiences on YouTube. It reminds me of my Andy dream. Although I didn't die or anything like that. This is just a dream that was so vivid. And I don't remember a lot of it. I just remember a lot of colors. We went to other planets. He was having the time of his life and showing me all the places he's going. And it was kind of like that song, what plays on Aladdin. I can show you the world. You know that song?
I
It's
don't. You
it's
can.
like,
You're welcome to sing it.
I don't know the words, and I'm not a good singer, but it's like the most beautiful song on Aladdin. And he just took me to all these planets, and then they took me to space and showed me the secret to the world. And it was all about numbers in the sky, and we're all on these frequencies, and each personality has their own frequency, and it was so much simpler than we could have ever imagined. And I just couldn't believe how easy and how mathematical and how it all made sense in the world. And I can't wait to go back and tell everybody, and Andy, this is the best thing ever. I'm going to tell Jocelyn, I'm going to tell everybody, this is the best thing ever. And he said, oh, except you won't, because you're not going to remember any of this except this moment right now, standing with you. And I love you, and tell Jocelyn I love her, and I'll see you soon. And I just woke up with, oh my God, I got it. And then I couldn't remember any of it. But I do remember the feeling of how simple and easy it was, and how wonderful it was. And I guess that's all I'm supposed to remember.
Interesting. Well, it's fascinating to me because I've heard. I think the guy's name is Garnet Schulhauser or something, and he had written a couple of books, and he has a guardian angel who he'd said had taken him on journeys. And what he described is very similar to what you just described.
Oh, really?
Going to different planets and seeing different things. I don't remember anything about the mathematical equation, although I feel like I've seen that other places. It's fascinating to me how much stuff it just overlaps. But the other planets. Do you remember anything about the other planets?
I remember one specifically was Andy's favorite, and it was just a lot of orange. And it was a planet you go to learn joy and fun. And that is where he was spending his time. And he just wanted me to know how happy he is, so I could tell Jocelyn. And that's
That's
only vivid memory I retain from the dream, because, like he said, I really wasn't allowed to remember any of it, other than just, it was just the most exciting ride. I just couldn't really remember it.
what a gift for him to give you as a thank you for doing all that. Because that feels right to me that that's how he thanked you.
Yeah, and it's really helped me through my kids have lost friends and car accidents and really tragic things. And it's really helped me, keep believing and keep the faith. Like, it was so real, um, that it was such a gift.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, and I do believe that you can get a spectacular goodbye. Well, actually, share if you're comfortable doing so the spectacular goodbye you got from Haley's twin.
Oh yeah. So that was really really crazy. But I had three friends that weren't getting pregnant, really close friends. And I had said a little prayer. You can read all about it in your book. Um, but it basically, the morning of that her soul left me, we call her herd only because Haley says it's a girl from her dreams. But I feel that I felt it in my body, and I'm very much in touch with my body. So that's not really surprising, but it was just I was laying in bed, and I have no other words to describe it other than I was just relaxing, and I felt what it would feel like to have a shooting star in your stomach. It just felt like all down my abdomen. And I said out loud in that moment, if you have left me, this is when you left me. Just so I would remember that moment. Like, it was nothing I've ever felt before or since. And so it's pretty spectacular. And and
Yeah,
and, and really, when we found out at the 16-week ultrasound that Haley was just one, my first question was, where's the other one? And the doctors and the nurses and everybody's feeling so bad for me and Richard, but we had such a, like, knowing about it already. and such a peace. And we were, because of that gift from that soul, it was all about celebrating the one that was there. We really didn't look back. We really, right or wrong, we really didn't mourn we just really trusted that this is going to be the way it's supposed to be. And the doctor, pulled me aside and said he had some concerns, and he's sorry for this, but he thinks it's the best thing for the babe, this Haley, to be alone in the womb. And we just really went forward really quickly. We adapted to, okay, it's one now. And I really think in hindsight, it was because of, she gave me 3 or 4 weeks to process that she had left me. So I was just so grateful, because I think I really thought in that moment they both had left me. I really thought that something big had happened. Well, something big did happen, but I was just so grateful that I still had a baby there, and she was showing off and flipping around on the screen. And so I just had a lot of gratitude.
That's amazing. Well, you had mentioned your three friends. Talk about the prayer that may have actually led to that whole thing.
So this is the power of prayers, and don't say a prayer like this unless you mean it, because I don't think I understood the power of prayers at this time. I don't know. I mean, everything happens for a reason, but I will never say a prayer that I don't mean with 110% of me since this point. But Haley, when I got pregnant with Haley, it was very easily. I had gotten pregnant very easily with my first child as well. And then, of course, get pregnant with my second child, and it's twins. And I had 3 close friends that one was having miscarriage after miscarriage, and the other 2 couldn't get pregnant at all. And this is my inner circle. And I'm watching them struggle. And then here I am, like, ta-da, so I had immense guilt, like immense guilt. And so I said to God, why are you not giving them their babies? Give them my babies. I'll get pregnant again. Just take this guilt away from me. They deserve babies just as much as me. And please just do what you need to do. I'll give you my babies. And, but I really desperately, especially, my best friend, she deserved a baby more than anybody I knew. And I was just praying my heart out. And then, so I think that's why I thought God took both of my babies when I felt that shooting star feeling. I thought, oh my gosh, what did I ask for? And then, so Haley was born in April, and then 2 more baby girls came in June, and then the third one in July. So all 3 friends had babies within a couple months of that prayer, or of Haley's birth, I should say.
That's amazing. And so, and you said they're actually friends of Haley's as well, aren't they?
Yeah, like one of yes, best friends, one of them. Yeah.
That is so cool. I just think that's amazing. And it's wild how the universe and prayers and all that kind of stuff work. Because, like you said, if you don't mean it, don't
Right.
pray for it, because, it's that
Yeah.
careful what you wish for.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend offering up anything like that again. but
Yeah.
but I do trust and have faith that God does things for our highest good and all that.
Yeah. Well, I think it was fascinating too, because in the book, when you told the story and you wrote it, that you had mentioned that you actually didn't remember that spectacular departure right away, and it wasn't until like after the ultrasound that you really realized. Like, we talk about that time gap.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. When we go through trauma, I can speak for only myself, but I've noticed that the brain kind of has a way of protecting you. And I didn't really remember that morning with the shooting star feeling. I didn't really remember even the prayer until it was probably after I had this sense of peace I couldn't explain. It was more subconscious that I kind of half remembered, but once the babies were all born, the 3 babies, and everybody was so happy, my friends were moms, they all had these beautiful baby girls. It was like that's when the memory started coming back to me that I prayed for this. Oh my God, I offered up my babies for this. So I just feel like at the time the doctor said there's just one, I went full force into celebration. I never allowed any mourning. I was just positive, positive, positive. And and so I think the brain kind of protected me from the trauma of it was a loss. I'd read twin books for 2 months, but when I saw all the babies, the brain kind of allowed me to remember and slowly, process that I prayed for this, um and then I remembered the morning I said aloud, if you've left me, this is when you did. It just kind of all came back when the babies came.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because one of the things that was so powerful about, Haley's story was when she had asked her twin, basically said, I wish you were here. Why aren't you here with me, kind of thing. And then she got the vision of what their lives would have been like had she been carried to term. And then it's interesting that, the doctor, without obviously knowing any of that, and long before that dream had happened, and Haley probably wasn't aware of the doctor's concerns, but there
Right.
were concerns about you carrying both to term, because it would have, it sounds like, had an impact on on them physically. So share more about that if you can.
Well, what's not even in the book and what Haley doesn't even know, I had really easy pregnancies, but I had a really traumatic first birth with my first child. But the doctor, he had a few concerns he told me about when we found out there were no longer twins. But the only one I remember specifically is he mentioned cerebral palsy. And when Haley describes in her dream the two of them being very skinny in one wheelchair, and that her twin showed her what life would be like if she had stayed, and the price Haley would have had to pay by, you know, being in a wheelchair for her whole life. What Haley has no idea is that she's describing what cerebral palsy looks like. And so when she had that dream, it really made me remember that was Dr. Craddock's exact words, that he said his number one fear was, or he had a few, but I remember that was one of them. And so he just said, he was the one who really made me positive, like, this is meant to be, and this is for the health of everybody. And Haley specifically is probably one of the most physical people. Even at week ultrasound, she's flipping. There's nobody that enjoys her, like, body and doing flips and just being active. And she's really celebrated that her entire life. She skis. She's always going to be out there moving her body. She's not like one of those girls that sits around and plays with dolls. She was always so physical. So I just really celebrate that gift in itself.
Yeah, no doubt. That's interesting. Well, and you said something else really powerful that it was interesting, because when I first read it, when you shared your story, it caught me. And then I didn't really think about the fact that I actually had an example of that too, that the idea that the brain protects you. Um, and because it does seem odd, it's like, well, how do you not remember that if it happened or whatever? And then such a powerful thing to have something, that seems like a comet, or if you will, which is why I thought it was so cool that you named her Haley, by the way. As we talked about, I just thought that was awesome. But for me, I remember I was a senior in high school, and I was down in Chicago at the corner, right next to Lake Point Tower, where there's a crosswalk. And it was, as I was looking at the crosswalk, I don't remember where I was standing exactly, but I feel like I was standing next to the building, kind of looking at the crosswalk. And I saw a guy walk across the street with his dog. And, so I vividly remember the guy and the dog. And then this car came, because this was at, like, right at heading into Sunset. And this guy turned westbound on Grand Avenue, and didn't, because of the sun shining in his car, probably, and the fact that he was probably going too fast too. He didn't see the guy and his dog, and he plowed into the two of them, and without stopping or whatever. And I mean, he obviously stopped after that, but like, like full speed into this poor guy. And I watched, like, he flew, but my brain didn't process it was a person flying through the air. My brain shifted it to a newspaper. I'm like, that's really weird that there's a newspaper flying through the air. And it wasn't until he hit the ground that I realized that he had been hit by a car. But I watched the whole thing, and my brain didn't register it, because it was like, it was too traumatic to actually know what was going on. So I do 100% believe that exactly what you said, that our brain does protect us from things like that. That, you just in the moment, I can't even imagine, even though I watched it, my brain didn't want me to see it.
Right. Yes. It's a brilliant machine, definitely.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know you've had some other experiences. If you're comfortable sharing, it would be a nice way to finish if you've got another story or two that you feel like sharing.
Well, I mean, I asked Richard last night because, I said, hey, I'm going to talk about some things tomorrow. What stands out in your brain? He said, oh my gosh, tell Rob it's like every day. Pick a day. What does he want to know? And,
I love Richard. He's awesome.
he just, poor Richard, I just know I'll call him up and say, are you doing this, that, or, and he just like, oh my God, like, how do you always know everything? And but one story he brought up last night was funny. It was so random and so lighthearted, but I had a dream one morning, and I said, oh my gosh, I dreamt I saw Rebecca at Starbucks and I loved her jacket, And so, of course, we're getting dressed while I'm blabbering about this dream. And she looked so pretty in this coat. It was so cute. Oh. So, on the way home from soccer game that morning with the kids, one of them wanted to go to Starbucks, and I run in with them. And of course, I see Rebecca, and I love her coat. And poor Rebecca, I don't know that she's necessarily into all this stuff, but I said, oh my gosh, I dreamt that I was going to see you here and you're going to be wearing that cute coat. You look great. And her face was like, so I've learned that even if it's the most lighthearted thing, a lot of people aren't open to this, but I just think it's all energy, and time is an earth concept, but it's all energy, where
Yeah.
an energy that doesn't necessarily need time, like going back to Jocelyn knowing before she could before it even happened. uh,
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really curious about that because so with the coat, did you how did what you saw in the dream compare to what you saw in real life? Obviously, you liked it in the dream, and you liked it in real life, but did it actually have like the same colors and style and
I,
stuff?
exactly the same, to be honest. I think it was a black, if I remember right, this was years ago. This is around the time I think I'm pregnant with Georgia. So it was just like every day was something. Richard was just beside himself. Like, I don't know if I can take much more of this. What is going on? And then, then it just calms down to just normal life. But those few years, it was pretty intense. So yeah, I think it was pretty much exact. It, the other
Yeah.
day, I did dream about Wordle. I don't know if you play that silly game,
Oh, I
but
played it once in a while. It's interesting. Yeah.
I dreamt of the word I should use as the starter word, and you have to get 5 letters correct in the right place, and I got 4, and and then the word I didn't even end up knowing. I'm trying to remember what it was. It was a word I can't even remember. I wouldn't have known what that word was, but since I put in the starter word, oh, I think it was plant. So it was plant, and the word ended up being PLAIT. This was a week or two ago, but
Oh,
never in a million years have I used plants for the first Wordle word. But my dream told me to use the word plant,
that's
and so
amazing.
yeah, so it was just random. So I get random things like that all the time, and I've just gotten to the point where I appreciate it and just say thank you when it happens, and okay, my instincts are alive, and that means if this can happen to me, this can happen to anybody. That means we're all connected, and it's so much bigger and better than we all sometimes keep the faith. We all need to have faith that we're connected, and this is all happening for a reason, and it's not random. And just little things like that are like gifts from God saying, keep believing, keep believing.
I love that. Yeah, because one of the things that I'd read along the way, which I think is interesting, is that the negative energy is a lot easier to pick up on in many cases, which is why people, a lot of the stories you hear are the premonitions. Like the people who dreamt about Titanic and things like that, and didn't go on the ship. And there's all kinds of stories about things like that,
Right.
in various disasters. But I love you're so in touch, and it's such a great example that it doesn't always have to be, this death and grief and sorrow and murder and destruction. It can be fun and playful. And it's like, hey, here's a game you like, and here's a way to win it in 2 moves. You know, which
Yes.
is clearly not a save the world sort of thing, but that it doesn't have to be, because that's like what those synchronicities and well, in your case, premonitions are, just a nice reminder that, hey, we may not be on the planet of joy and adventure or whatever that planet was, but it doesn't mean that you can't still have fun here.
Exactly. Yes. I love that.
What was that planet about? Joy, and what was the other thing?
Oh, I just remember it was joy, adventure. It was fun. It was like
Yeah,
how
joy. Yeah, that's
creative.
awesome.
Yeah, creativity. Yeah, it was very orange and vibrant.
Good. Well, for Megan, by the way, I should say, as a way to close this, is also a fabulous writer. And I know at some point she will be having books out. So when she does, rest assured, I will include links to any websites, any YouTube, any books, anything. If you want to learn more about Megan, she's amazing. And definitely one of my favorite people. And I think back, it's like, I don't remember the moment that you and I like first connected. It must have been in one of my visits to Charlotte or whatever. But I just wish I had known you like the whole time, because there were all those years after you first got married, but you and I never really knew each other very well,
Yeah,
because I met you at the wedding.
right. I think we really got deep and learned this about each other. How because a lot of my life, people are now starting to get really open about these things. How we can know things without knowing them, and I think
Yeah.
so many people do it. They just don't talk about it. But you are somebody I could talk to, and I think that was in 2017 in London is when we really discovered that we have a lot in common between writing and following our curiosity and all these topics that Catholic children weren't raised to. I'm just always questioning and asking tons of questions. I get curious, and you were like-minded, and we just had so many fun conversations starting then. And you've just been such
Yeah.
a good friend and such an amazing person for me to talk to these last years.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate it. Well, and I remember vividly how inspired I was by your creativity. And just a quick little example for everybody about Megan's creativity. Their house had burned down. And the reason they were in London was because Megan went to the insurance company and said, "Look, you're paying all this money for us to rent a house for 6 people, rather than renting a fully furnished house. Could we take that money and travel?" Because at the time Richard was able to work remotely, and that was a real and if I remember correctly, they were actually going to save money by
Oh,
doing that.
they were as excited as me, yeah, because we're saving them a lot of money, and
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and it was a win. So it's a win-win, and
Totally, and
they,
who thinks to do that?
yeah, I was like, if that's the budget for the month, I can live on half of that and do way cooler things. So yeah, it was.
Yeah, which is brilliant. I mean, it just and I love that, and your kids got such an amazing experience. I got to live with you for a week or so, which
I
is
know that,
that was
yeah, that was the beginning of all of our fun conversations, and this is
exactly.
all meant to be.
Yeah, and so, if in case I haven't already done it, I hereby give you permission. If you get any premonitions, positive or negative, you're always welcome to tell me, and don't worry about what I might think. So.
Okay, I would tell you. I'd call you in a second.
Yeah, no, I love it. All right. Well, you are absolutely wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. I'm so excited. I'm glad that people got to meet you, virtually and in, semi real time, or got to see, the energy that I know and love about you, because it comes across so well in the way you write. I love the way you write, but also, for people to get to meet you, you know, like this, I think it's fantastic. So thank you for taking the time. You are an absolute sweetheart. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Oh, thank you so much, Rob. It was such an honor. You're so sweet to ask me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye. All right. So that brings this wonderful episode to a close. Definitely hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. It's all free. You're welcome to come back, check out anytime. We've got lots of cool interviews coming up, and we'll be talking about different things. So sometimes it'll be more psychic related. We've got some interviews coming up that may be more dream related. We talked about dreams obviously in this episode, but like creative inspiration. There's a particular musician I'm going to be interviewing, which I'm very excited about. So I'll share more about that later. But again, thank you for tuning in. It's absolute pleasure. Look forward to you on the next adventure. And in the meantime, follow your inner compass.
It's all about trying to make it.